Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis and I'm the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software. And in today's session, I'm excited to bring to you a kind of a part 2 in a series of webinars talking about the new Nexus Automation API. And in today's session, we're going to be focusing very heavily on the accounts management aspect of this API, users and groups. Now, of course, as always, this webinar is recorded, and I expect many of you will come back and use this as a reference in the future when you're starting to implement this API at your firms. Those of you who are watching this on YouTube, we hope that you find this educational and useful, and we hope to earn a like on our channel from you watching this and learning some new information. Now, for those of you who are joining us live, this is a live webinar. I am watching the questions window, so if you have questions and you want to get them answered, we encourage you to throw them into the Q&A window here in this GoToWebinar session, and I'll try to answer them live in context with what we're talking about today. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let's talk about this topic and see what this is all about today. So we've already covered a part 1, and I'll recap that in a little bit here, but in the part 2 of this series, we're going to dive deeper into the CTC Nexus Automation API and explore how it can be used to manage users and groups within our online portal, our account system, much more efficiently. I'm going to talk about a lot of theory. I want to show a couple of things today, but we're going to cover everything today from user creation and management, group creation and management, how to automate processing of associating users and groups and rights, and a lot of stuff here. Hopefully, by the end of this webinar, or if you're reviewing this in the future, by the end of your review of this on YouTube, we hope that you'll have a solid understanding of the capabilities, at least, of the Nexus Automation API, and also how you can use this API to manage your users and groups. And also, with practice, we're going to hope that you're going to be able to automate many of your manual tasks that currently are taking up some of your time. Whatever that automation means for you, we're here to help support you in that and talk you through. So if you have questions in the future about how this might be useful for you, we do encourage you to reach out, because certainly this is a deep topic. It's not one that many of us are going to just inherently know, so it's going to take some study, it's going to take some planning, and we're going to talk you through that in a lot of cases throughout the discussion today. So the learning objectives for this particular session is we want to talk about getting the basic data. Just a basic get call and a little bit of what that looks like. We're going to then take a look at creating and updating users and groups. We're going to add and remove users from groups. And we're also going to talk about the management of user and group permissions. And again, in some cases, I'll be showing live examples. In other cases, we'll just be taking a look at some of the data. So this is a full series. There's a 4-part series. We've already done the comprehensive introduction. That was our last session. This session is talking about using the Accounts API. And for those of you interested in continuing forward in this discussion after today, and we hope that you will, we'll be talking next about the Projects API for the project activity log data within the Nexus suite. And then we'll be talking about the CMS data using the CMS API and how you can automate a number of tasks there. We're just building on what we're talking about today. In all cases, no matter what, there's some prerequisites for these APIs that you need to use. We've talked in the past about a reporting API, and it had some prerequisites. This one also has a few prerequisites. We just want to make sure that you're aware of these so you can plan accordingly. So for these prerequisites, first off, of course, you have to be able to sign into the actual portal and use CTC Software's tools and use that environment. This does all interact with our online system. And so you'll need to be able to sign in at ctcsoftware.com/portal. You will need an automation access key. For those of you who participated with us in the reporting API series, there is a separate, intentionally separate reporting key. That just lets you get a ton of data, a ton of data. With this automation side, though, you're actually pushing changes in, and you are probably going to want to make sure you control and throttle that separate from those who can just view and read some of the data. So there is an automation access key that you will need, and you can reach out to us and get that automations key from license request at ctcsoftware.com. So feel free, reach out, grab that. If you have tools with us, that is free. So just a part of your account. You are going to want to establish a Postman account, postman.com or postman.web. I forget exactly what the address is. We'll see it in a minute here. You want to go up to Postman. You can search it on Google as well. Build yourself a Postman account. It's free because this helps you navigate through all the controls that are available within a REST API. If there's good documentation, you can just look at it there. And I'll share with you how you can get some of that at the end of today's presentation for those of you who hang out for the QA. And also, of course, you want to be planning ahead. Think about how could you implement some of these integrations, these automation integrations for some of your internal workflows? How can you streamline your processes? So as we're talking about stuff today, just keep that in the back of your mind because this is all about planning. You don't necessarily have to use everything today because, again, this is recorded. It's going to be up on YouTube, and you can come back and review it, and you can always reach out to CTC. But you definitely want to start with a plan. Don't just start banging away at an automation API because when you start pushing changes in, if you're not doing it intentionally, you could cause yourself a lot of headache. So think it out, plan it out, and then try it. So let's start with getting some data. This all starts with just interacting with an API and getting some information. And we're going to take a look at what this looks like. First of all, we're going to start with some basic essentials here on how a REST API works just a little bit, because this is all using what's called a REST API. It's a method of communicating with some other server or some other system via an independent, non-specific language, right? I can communicate to this using Excel's VBA or Power Query or Python or C# or Lisp or Dynamo. Like, you can do this with a lot of different systems. It doesn't matter because a REST API is sort of a universal language that you can use to communicate, provided you know how to hook up to it. Now, it's going to start with knowing what the path is, how to get to it. And this REST API uses a URL. It's hosted on the internet via CTC's site, and it's right here, https API ctcsoftware.com. You don't have to copy this and write it down frantically. I'll have tools that you can get access to when you're ready to start using this. But this is using the automation accounts major route here, that major section or scope within our API environment. Now, throughout the presentation today, I am going to be using our API stage. So at the beginning there, this prefix where it says API.CTC software, I'm intentionally using API stage because the changes that I'm making, I don't want to hit my production environment. That could be a problem. Because I'm going to be maybe throwing some random settings in there, and I don't want that to appear if my other team members are doing demos for our other customers, right? So here, though, there are within this environment very specific, what I'm going to call routes for different actions that you want to take and different kinds of interactions with those routes. I'm going to explain those to you. So some of those routes would be something like groups or users or group roles, and that would simply be a suffix after the automation here, /users or /group roles or something like that. And again, I'll be showing you that. Now, every single one of these routes will require a parameter that's called an access key, and this is your organization access key. This is that access key, that automations key that I was mentioning earlier. You'll need that because none of these routes will work if you don't have a valid access key, because that key helps it understand which organization your actions are going to affect, right? You don't want somebody else's actions to affect you, and you don't want to be probably affecting somebody else's organization, right? So this whole set of information, when you're getting and placing information and deleting stuff, that all relates to your organization and uses your access key to route that to the correct spot in the back-end system. So along with getting this data, there's different types of requests. And I'm going to start with the basic one first, which is a GET request. There's a few endpoints here a few routes here that leverage a GET request. This is the most basic REST API. You can actually just throw a GET request into a URL browser, into like a Chrome or Edge or Brave or whatever browser you use. You can just copy paste the URL and you'll get information back. It's pretty simple. And so for these GET requests, and I'm going to use this structure consistently throughout, there's going to be some input parameters that you will need in most of these GET requests. Now, in the case of the users or the groups, you're going to need things like the access key. That's always going to be there. That access key will always be one of the input parameters. In the case of users and with groups, you can actually query. You can filter down, similar to how inside the Nexus CMS, you can search for something like content, or in the portal, you can start to search for users by name. You can do something similar here. You can include a query to say, only give me people whose name is Bob or includes Bob, and then it will start to run that query. You can choose how it's going to sort things when they come back. So groups, you might sort by name. Users, you might sort by first name or last name. You can control that parameter so you know exactly how the information is coming back, or you could leave it completely unsorted. That's up to you too. And if you sort by something, you can also choose if it's ascending or descending, and it's a true false for sort descending. So sort descending true would put Z first, and false would put A first, right? You can also choose what page number of information you want to go after, and that's because some of you have well more than 100 users. And so you can also choose a page size, the maximum being 100. You can get 100 items at a time. Now, when you're using this GET request, sometimes you say, well, Sean, if I have 6,000 users, how do I know what page a certain user is on? Well, you might not, right? So if you're just querying and getting everybody, and you're getting all 6,000 users back, you'll have to run this GET request 60 times, and you'll have to include the page number, page 1, page 2, page 3, and so on. You'll have to iterate through. And for that, you'll have to know how many total users you have to divide that by 100 and figure out how many pages you have so you can know which increment you're on. That's just some basic programming iteration stuff. You can probably figure that out if you know a little bit about code, or we can have a conversation about it, and I can show you a bit about that. So when you run a GET request, you'll often get a response body that will look something like this. These response bodies, this is specific to like users or groups. You'll get a similar response body for them. Some of the common things here will be you'll get a total items when it's a multi-item list of things. And then you'll get the items in their own little listed collection, and then the items themselves will have their data, and then the next item, and the next item, and the next item. You can iterate through those to find something you're looking for, or store it in a data set and do something with it. So this here, the total items, is a property that you can use to get how many total users you have. And again, dividing that by 100 and rounding up will get you how many pages you need to fetch. In my case, I have 67 users. And within my users, I can get all 100 or all 67 of them in one go. That saves a bit of strength on the API side. And then for the items, I store them myself in a little Excel table, and then I manipulate them from there. So an example would be if I was to take a look at this in the Postman environment, because Postman is a good starting point for a lot of what you're going to do. If you want to see how the data is going to come back, I do recommend leveraging a toolkit like Postman. So I have my Postman environment already set up here. If you want to get a copy of my Postman environment, we encourage you to reach out. License request, where you're going to be requesting your access key, is a good place to go for that. Just ask for it. We'll send that along with the access key here. But if I go into accounts, the part we're focusing on today, you'll notice that we have a series of different routes in here. Let me collapse all these guys so that we just have the ending routes, like users. If I go into users, there is a GET request. We were just talking about GET requests. And so here you'll see the full path of everything. And in fact, if I hit the little code button over here to the right, I will see that full path all written out. And you'll see here, API stage. I told you I was going to be using the stage side of this so that I could work with that kind of isolated environment, not my production side. Automation accounts, version 1 automation, and then here's that route, users. And then it starts with the parameters. There's a question mark, and it has the access key. So I mentioned you have to have that, and it fills in my access key. It's actually pulling that automations key from a parameter over here in my environment that I'm using. Then it puts in the query, which is querying everything. It's getting me page 1 with a page size of, in this case, 25. That's what I've chosen to do here. And it's only filtering for active users. So active is set to true in this case. It's sorting by last name, and it's not sorting descending. So it's going to go with the A's first and the Z's last. And so if I was to just simply copy and paste this, I'll just copy and go over here to my web browser and paste this in over here, you get data back. And you're like, Sean, that looks terrible. It absolutely looks terrible, and I don't recommend looking at it here. It's just a way to show that, yes, you can get the data back very simply, and you'll see here total items 67 and then the items in their little list. But that's a rubbish way of looking at it. So if I use Postman, again, this is why I recommend Postman. When you use this, you get a much more beautified representation of the data, total items 67. In my case, I know my page size is 25. If I divide 67 by 25 and round up, that's 3 pages total. And I would have to fetch this page 1, page 2, and page 3 with the exact same parameters so that I could get all of my information. Or I could say, you know what, let's just fetch 100 items. I'll resend this. It's going to rerun the same exact thing, and this will pull me all 67 in one go. If I try to do more than 100, it'll probably give me an error and say that I'm out of range. So if you were to not include page size, for example, the default would be 25. So you don't have to include it if you're going to go 25 at a time. In my case, I'm doing 100. So with this, now I can see the users, the basic data for my users, the ID, the email, display name, first name, last name, the organization they're associated to. I can see the status, that in this case it's an active user. I can see description, office, department, and if it's an SSO user, a single sign-on user, or not. So I can see this information in just the basic data, and this is a lot of what most of us are going to want to work with anyway. There's other calls that I can do to get more detail if I want to. In some cases, I might want to. Let's do another get action here, like getting the groups. If I send the get with the groups over here, taking a look at this, I have, again, the access key, a query, a sort by, a page, and a page size. So it's basically the same properties here. And when I hit send, this is going to go fetch for me 25 items at a time. I've only got 21 groups here, but it's going to give me these items here in a list. It's a slightly differently formatted list because the properties for groups are different than for users, but it's going to be consistent for each of these items, ID, name, description, all the way down. Now, if I wanted to know more details about a particular group, like let's say I go down to my our BIM managers group or our org admin group. This might be a good one to take a look at. If I take a look at this group, I can take this ID and use this in the next step of getting some additional details. So let's use another get request. I'm going to use get the group details by ID. This one similarly has access key, right? And it has a different parameter here. It requires a group ID. And if I put a group ID in here and hit send, this time I don't get the exact same kind of response body. I don't get a total number of items because I don't need it. I'm asking for a single discrete item. So this one gives me a slightly different structure, but it gives me all of the individual discrete details, telling me what role IDs are applied, if it's a default group, who updated it last, what its descriptions are, who created it in the first place and when. There's all kinds of information that's available here that I can get more of if I need to. Sometimes you don't need to and you don't care, but that's okay. There's a few other get actions in here we can go after, but we're not really interested in that right now. Another probably slightly more clean way of doing this when you really start using this in production is to use some better environment to get and review this information. And for me, that's Excel. So for me, I have in my computer here, my stage hookup to my Automation API version 1. There's a lot of stuff inside of here, but the part that I'm going to focus on once again is just the API aspects of this. And I made this particular Excel file pretty easy to use. In fact, there is a settings option up on top here, a little tab, and you can put in what your CTC access key is for the Automations API right here. And then on the accounts tab, you'll see that I have the ability to get a few items like getting the roles list, getting groups, getting users, right? So if I say get groups here, this is going to run the basic call, but then for each one of those individual groups, it's going to try to go get the details. Sometimes that works. I think I'm hitting it a bit too hard, and my stage environment is a little bit weaker than my production environment. So sometimes this information over here doesn't always fully fill out. That's okay. But you can generally see here the general information that we're looking at and 10 of the details, I guess, over here. But I can get this and review this in a list form way easier here than I can in that Postman environment. Similarly, if I told this to go get my users, this will go fetch all of my user data. This one takes a little longer because there's a lot more data to go after, and it might take a second here. So I'm going to jump back into the presentation, and it yelled at me. I'm just going to end that. It doesn't like my get users request right now. I probably broke something before this call today, but that's all right. We'll focus on groups in this case. So let's talk about how we can create or update groups and users as well, because getting information is cute and all, but the whole point of this is to automate some changes in a different environment. How do I do some of that automation? Like maybe you're using single sign-on, so you could care less about your user automations, but maybe you want to automatically associate users to groups based on their office or department associations, or based on some other things that you've got going on in-house. And so how can you do that with this API? So let's talk through what this looks like. We talked already about a get call, a get request. Now we're going to talk about a put or a delete type of request. And this is true for users and for groups. And you'll notice that I have user in quotation marks because it only has the put request. It doesn't have a delete request. Within our environment, you can never truly delete a user. You can simply change their status to inactive, disabled, or deleted, okay? So for us, we're going to be using put for users and put and delete for groups, and I'll show you some examples of this. Now, with this, there are some input parameters, of course, right? There's the access key that is an input parameter. You'll always have to do this so that it knows which organization is getting this user or getting this user change. With a put request, it's a little bit more involved. You can't just copy paste this into a browser. You actually have to include some header information. So this does take a coding environment of some sort. I'm using Visual Basic for my workflow today, VBA. You could also use Python or C# or you name it, whatever your favorite programming language is. And in this case, I'm communicating with this REST API using JSON data. So my body that I'm going to be sending along with this that gives it the instructions it's supposed to do is going to be in JSON format. And so here you can see an example. If I was updating something, I would include the ID of the group. This is a group specific body. I would give it a name or modify the name if I want to change that or change the description, or I could omit any of these three. Omit the ID if I'm creating something brand new, or I could omit the name or description if I wasn't making a change to it, and it would just leave it as it is. Users are similar. I could include the user's ID and change things like the office or department properties for them, or potentially if I'm not using single sign-on, I could force change their email addresses if they had an email change or something, change first and last names if somebody changes their name for marriage purposes, or I just misspelled something in the first place. You name it. There's a lot of reasons you might want to make changes, but I can put and delete these types of things by using this kind of information. Now, this is a put request. In the case of a delete request, there's actually an extra parameter, which is the group ID or the user ID. Well, users don't have it, so group ID if I'm deleting, and I'll show that a little bit later on. So actually, I'll show that right now. So let's just say I wanted to create a group. Let's do this test real quick here. I'm going to show this in a couple of different ways. I'm up here on the portal. You can see I've created a bunch of groups already. I'm going to create a new A-named group, but I'm going to do it not via the portal. I'm going to do it via the API. We're going to do it in Excel and push that to the CTC system and see that refresh and update here. So I want to make a new group. It's going to be called A_webinar test. And I'm going to give it a description, something to describe this group. I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. Or I could leave that empty, and I misspelled something. That's fantastic. So here, if I click the Create or Update Group button, it will come back and say, success. You've got a new group, and its ID is this, and it's called a webinar test, and its description is something to describe this group. And I can click OK, and if I refresh and re-get my groups, that will show up here because I'm getting my data back in an alphabetized way. I can wait for that to happen, or I can come out here to the portal and simply F5 refresh the portal here, and I will have a new webinar. I misspelled it. That's fantastic. Webinar something here. So I could, again, push the fix for that as well from the form if I wanted to. Now I have quite a few groups up here that I really don't want. You can see I've been testing this for a minute. I've got 5 groups that are kind of trash in this environment. I want to delete them. So I'm going to use a delete call in this case. I'm going to do it from here. The way that I have this set up is I select my ID field and I hit delete group, and it's going to give me a success message. It doesn't delete it from here just yet. I'm doing this individually. The way that I wrote this is a one at a time delete. You could always code this to be better if you wanted to, but I'm just going through and deleting this right from here, and it's giving me some success messages or failure messages so I know what's going on. There's also a test group down here at the bottom. Let's delete that as well because that one's trash, and I think this LAS test, I can delete that group as well. So I can just get rid of and clean up a lot of my groups. So if I refetch and refresh this list, my groups will now have the newest data, but also here on the portal, if I hit F5, it's going to give me just my official groups that I really care to be working with. It's simple, right? I can do this from Excel. I can make some changes and push a button, and it's driving direct to the portal. That is consistent for all of the rest of the things that I'll be talking about today, though I'm not going to be showing anything more in Excel. We'll just kind of take a look at the structures of things. All right. So this is sort of a put call. Oh, and by the way, I didn't show this in Postman, but I am going to show it there as well. If I do go to a put call here, if I go to the group route and I go to the put call, once again, the parameters is the access key. This is why I really like Postman, because I can see all this data really quickly from here and see what are the parameters that are expected, and it gives me a template body that I can use to work with this. So if I wanted to, say, put a new one up here and just kind of see what happens, let's just do a underscore another test, the space in this case, and then I'm just going to omit the description because I don't really care about it. I just want to push a name of a group, right? Just a single name. I'm going to send that up. This is going to publish that. It will give me a success here, a 200 message, and it tells me this is the ID, this is the name, and the description is nothing because I didn't give it a description. And also, if I go to the portal here, I can see here in the portal, if I refresh one more time, there we go, another test, right, with no description. And it tells me that it was created by and updated by the automations engine, because when I pushed this, it was via code. And so it tells you that this was created by code, and it was also last updated by code. There might be some down here. If I go to other pages, I don't know if I have any others. Yeah, none of these were updated by code because I deleted all the ones that I created or updated that way. But you will know if the last update happened by code, by automation, or by somebody interacting here with the portal directly. So you'll know that because it tracks that in the system. This way, if y'all are like, hey, this happened, why did this happen? You'll be able to see that, oh, it was updated by code somehow, and maybe the code screwed something up, right? It's important to know. Okay, so yeah, that's a put or a delete. The delete, again, let me just one more time show this. The delete deletes a group. It just asks for a group ID. There is no body in this case. There's no extra data about that. It just asks for a group ID. And if I was to, in this case, take this group ID right here, copy and just delete that right here, send that request, it's going to say, great, 204, that's a success on a deletion. There's no content to show. It just deleted it. It's done. Took less than a second, 348 milliseconds, and it was done. So super quick. You can very quickly create, modify, and delete things via code. Now let's talk about some more complicated things that you're probably going to want to consider for some of your automations. And this one here is managing user and group associations. This is probably the part that most of you are going to be the most interested in. Yes, I can create groups. That's great. But if I want to put users into those groups, right now it's one by one in the portal. Well, if you wanted to automate this, maybe by hooking up something with your Azure Active Directory or by doing something in Excel, you could do this. Well, what does this type of call look like? This is a post command. So before we used a put, this is slightly different. It's a post and or delete for group members. The endpoint that we're going to be calling is group members. And with this, again, there's an input parameter, which is the access key. That's never going to change. There's a group ID, similar to my delete command. There's a group ID, and then there's going to be a header telling it that there's a content type of application JSON, and there's going to be a body. And the body looks like this. The body is basically a list of IDs that are user IDs, and I'm either posting to add them to the group members list, to that particular group ID, or I'm deleting them from that group list. So you can get a list of all of them. You could delete them all if you want to clear it out. That's one way to do it. Or you can add users to particular groups. So you can manage these groups via code 100%. You could make changes in your Azure environment, your Azure AD environment, and you could, via running some code, have that automatically push to the CTC portal without having any kind of other special connectors. You fully control how you want that association to work. Similarly, you can manage user and group permissions here. So this is a put request. This is for user-roles or group-roles. A put request is a kind of a special kind of request. Typically what that means is it replaces all the data values that it's getting with the new value, just 100% replaces it. And so with the user roles and group roles, whatever list of roles you provide, it's going to replace all of it. There's no delete for this. I'm not adding a role and deleting a role. I'm just putting what I want the full role set to be. So it's fewer actions in this case. Again, there's input parameters. There's the access key that's going to be required. There is a header, which again, content type application JSON, because we're pushing JSON data. And in this case, for the body, if it's user roles, it's going to be user ID to tell it that you're pushing data to the user specifically. And if it's group roles, like you see here, it's going to be the group ID. And then within there, there's a role IDs list, which is just the list of the role IDs. And you say, hey, Sean, what the heck does that mean? What are role IDs? I've never seen that before. Well, let me show you this in Excel. In Excel, I have a Get Roles button, so you can actually see the list of the role IDs. And there's an Accounts Roles tab here. These apply to both users and groups, the same role IDs. And whatever IDs you provide, those will be the values that are associated to the user. So I can't pull users right now, but if I go to group roles, actually none of my group roles are pulling, that's fine. If I was to push that value into the environment and say, like this one right here, this particular group has 100, 200, 300, that basically means, if I go back to get roles again here, 100 is organization admin, 200 is user admin, 300 is a project admin. So by giving them 100, the 200 and 300 are actually redundant, but you could give them all the roles if you wanted to, or just give 100, or just give a mix and match of other roles. You can fully control that at the user level and at the group level. And no, again, just general organization management. With any users within a group, they get those groups extra admin privileges if that group has admin privileges. That's just how the groups work. A good reason why you might want to put users into groups and not have to manage roles individually, right? So that is what that body looks like, user ID or group ID with the explicit ID, and then the role IDs list in those little square brackets. That typically means something is a list of those IDs, whatever they are. All right, we've covered a lot of information here today. In this session, we covered the using the Accounts API. We talked about a lot of the controls. If you want to dig even deeper, I encourage you to do that. Again, the best way to do that is by getting our little Postman collections, taking a look at those. That'll make your navigation to this a lot easier. And certainly reach out with questions. And know this, if you're interested in the projects or the CMS APIs, that's fantastic. We're covering projects in our next Nexus Automation API series, talking about some of its controls, showing some examples of automatic project creation, path association, project deletion, date setting, all those things. So you could integrate with something like Deltek Vision. And then after that, the next following one will be the CMS API. So for those of you not hanging out for the Q&A session, I'm going to say thank you. We always appreciate when you do show up live and work with us. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, we also thank you, and we hope you found this information valuable today, and that you can begin to use some of this information in your day-to-day work and automations.